Excites me. We're talking about the topic of submission of all things, which personally I love things like this because we talk a lot in church here about theological things and spiritual things, but one of the things that I always found the most helpful and the most practical is when we started talking here about relational things. Because I've often described myself, I guess I can't use the term socially retarded anymore. I'm told that's not politically correct, but I've always found myself to be very inept and when it came to social matters, and that's why I love the practicality of Christianity that teaches me how to act and how to be around other people, and this is certainly one of those series. Today we're going to be talking about one line, a simple line out of the book of Ephesians, the 5th chapter, the 21st verse, that simply says, "Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ." There's no perfect translation in English of the Holy Bible. Everyone has its strengths and weaknesses. And in the King James, they use a word that doesn't show up nearly as much in the NIV that we usually use here. It's the word meek. One of the places in the King James where you'll find that word is Christ uses that particular word to describe himself. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am meek and gentle in spirit. And the problem with that word meek is it rhymes with another word, weak. And I've often interchanged the two, and I've pictured meekness as people who submit because they don't have a choice. And I tend to go to weakness instead of meekness. What reinforced that idea was back when I was in school years ago down in Hurley, South Dakota, there was a kid down there that everybody made fun of, and I'm sure he took his share of beatings in the bathroom, and he was a very vocal, overt Christian. I'll also throw the word obnoxious in there. Not judgmental, just observational. But he was very in your face about his beliefs. And physically, he was a very weak young boy. He actually kind of looked like some of those alien photos you see in the National Enquirer on the cover. He had this big head and this skinny little stick body, and he had this gray skin and these big sunken-in eyes, and he really did look like some of these alien abduction things, and he was very physically weak, but very vocal about Christianity. So I got that etched into my head at a very young age that if I was to be serious about church or Christianity, then I've got to be like that kid. And that was very unappealing to me because I didn't want to be obnoxious. I didn't want to be unpopular. And the way he was, every opportunity he got, every book report became a book report on the Bible. Every extemporaneous speech became a sermon. Every interaction with other kids in the hallway became a call to conviction, a call to conversion. And so based on my perceptions of that, I also projected that onto Jesus. And unfortunately, Hollywood seemed to reinforce that misconception of Jesus Christ, because when they portrayed Jesus in movies, they also picked very thin, weak, physically scrawny, 98-pound weakling, kick sand in their face at the beach kinds of people, maybe effeminate, or they portrayed Christ as just this very weak character. And I finally learned that nothing could be farther from the truth. The word meek, rightly defined, means tremendous power under control. We often use that term for our pets to describe a great big tough dog who is meek, who will not attack even if little kids punch him in the nose or pull his ears or ride him like a pony. He is a meek dog. And By rights, he should turn on you and attack, but he won't because he practices a type of restraint, a type of self-control. Now, when you translate that meek into gentle or humble, you lose that whole meaning, don't you? You could say a little kitten or a bunny rabbit is gentle, but that doesn't make it meek. And that's where a verse got a hold of me years ago that completely challenged my preconceptions about how Jesus was. Remember that account in the Garden of Gethsemane the night before Christ's crucifixion when they came out to arrest him? Remember that whole scene where the Bible talks about in Matthew 26, while he was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, arrived. With him was a large crowd armed with swords and clubs, sent from the chief priests and the elders of the people. Then the men stepped forward, seized Jesus, and arrested him. "Put your sword back in its place," Jesus said to him, "for all who draw the sword will die by the sword. Do you think I cannot call on my Father, and he will at once put at my disposal more than 12 legions of angels? Am I leading a rebellion that you have come out with swords and clubs to capture me?" I got to warn you, there's a little math involved. I was specifically told no math in church, or I would not have attended. But a legion is a Roman fighting force, generally, more or less, presumed to be about 6,000 men. Out of that 6,000, a lot of them have supporting functions, so the actual fighting force contained in a legion is probably around 5,250 soldiers. 5,250. Best of the best, tough guys. So 12 legions, crunch the numbers, 12 legions, 5,250 times 12, 63,000 angels. That's a lot. Picture in military rank, in military formation, angels lined up about as deep and as wide as the eye can see. 63,000 angels ready to go with a word. You turn back into the Old Testament, the book of 2 Kings, the 19th chapter, 35th verse. And what does it say? The scene here was that the Assyrian army was coming against the Jews. And had they arrived and taken care of their business, it would have been a slaughter. God was not going to let that happen. So, in retaliation, God dispatches an angel. One. He sends one angel. The entire Assyrian army is marching on the Jews, and one angel in one night kills 185,000 soldiers. These aren't just men. We're talking, again, best of the best. Special forces, black berets. These are some of the toughest soldiers to ever walk the face of the earth. One angel, one night, without breaking a sweat, kills 185,000 soldiers. So, do the math. 185,000 people killed by one. You've got 63,000 standing behind Christ. That means that easily you have enough firepower to kill 11,655,000,000 men. That's impressive. If you can wrap your head around this, imagine, here's Jesus Christ standing in the garden, and here's a bunch of people, dozens perhaps, coming at him, and what have they got? Clubs. Spears, or swords, maybe pointy sticks. I always pictured pitchforks, but I think that was the ones that took out Dr. Frankenstein. Flaming torches and pitchforks. But you get the idea. So Jesus is standing there going, okay, you want to throw down? What you got? You've got pointy sticks. I've got 63,000 angels. I win. Talk about bringing a knife to a gunfight. You see, it kind of reminds me of that other movie, Crocodile Dundee. That's not a knife. This is a knife. And that's the scene here. So you see, what you have in meekness is tremendous power under control. And the practical application of that for us is that Jesus was not forced or coerced into doing anything. He was a volunteer. And when we're called to be submissive, living this Christian life, it is not out of our weakness that we can choose to stand down and submit, but it is because of the strength that God gives us that we are sometimes able to not retaliate and not do what we are tempted to do. And ironically, it turns out that that takes a lot more strength than the option of exercising the power that we've got. Because in today's society, there's a multitude of ways that we can gain power and control over other people, aren't there? You can do it through education. I can go to school and get the degree and end up in that big corner office where I have power and control over other employees. I could do it through my popularity and my influence. I can seize political power, which gives me authority and control. I can do it through my occupation. I can get a job where every morning I strap on a badge and a gun, and that's going to give me authority and give me power over other people. I could do it through physical strength. I can lift weights and take all my steroids, and I can learn how to fight and become tough. And then maybe that'll give me the ability to bully other people into submission, get them to do what I want them to do. Or maybe I can do it through deceit. I can con people into doing what I want them to do. But do you know what the Bible says is one of the hardest things to seize control of? Our tongue. Our tongues. In fact, it actually says it's impossible for men to get control of that. It is ironically easier for me to control a company or even control a city or a state or control a country than it is for me to control what I say. If I have a juicy piece of gossip and I'm not supposed to tell, if I'm angry at somebody and I want to tell a third party so they can hate him too, just as much as I enjoy hating him, it'd be easier for me to conquer a country in some cases than to say no to myself. And you see, and that's where I started to understand that power over ourselves is actually more of a challenge and more of an accomplishment than power over other people. The ability to say no to ourselves, to say no to our desires, to say no to the lusts of our own flesh is tougher in a lot of cases than to seize control of others. And you see, the wisdom of that, once I got my head around how this actually works in practical terms, it really challenged me to look at my belief system. Because today, if you look in the news, you don't have to look very far to see people in our own country who have been very successful at seizing accumulating tremendous amounts of power and control politically, economically, through business, through a lot of sources. But how many of them were brought down because they could not say no to their own desires? They could control a corporation, but they couldn't control themselves. And they fell victim to their own temptations. And what brought them down and caused them ruin in the end was, that they couldn't say no to themselves. And that's where today, what really impresses me, and what I started to understand perhaps about that skinny kid that was very overt about Christianity back in high school, was maybe that guy had a lot more strength than I gave him credit for. And maybe it wasn't easy for him to be the way he was, but the strength of his convictions gave him a power that I lacked. And maybe instead of being angry at his weakness, I was really cursing my own. Because today, what impresses me more than political power or physical strength is people that have the ability to say no, that they can not eat everything that they want to eat. People that can say no to themselves and they don't have to buy everything they want to buy. They don't have to spend everything that they want to spend. People that don't have to go out and sleep with everybody they want to sleep with. People that practice submissiveness and self-control. You see, today, that's what impresses me, because I know today how much strength that actually takes. And on the heels of that, then, why on earth would we practice this thing called submission? Because the second challenge of that, is, other than thinking it makes me weak, is that to me that made no earthly sense. Submit? I mean, why would you do that exactly? Because I'll be the first to admit there's a little vigilante in me. Okay, more than a little. Other people that I saw trying to get ahead in life, not once do I ever remember trying to get ahead. I spent my life getting even. I didn't want to get ahead, I just wanted to get even. And when I was growing up back in the 1970s was the glory days of revenge films at the drive-in. And I fed my head on a steady diet of things like Death Wish with Charles Bronson, Fighting Mad with Peter Fonda, movies like Walking Tall, Sheriff Buford Pusser, things like Chuck Norris, Good Guys Wear Black. He didn't take any crap. Movies like, and my favorite, Billy Jack. Anybody remember Billy Jack? To this day, I can still recite about every word he said in all of those movies. I'm going to take my left foot and whop you on the right side of your head. And you know what? There's not a darn thing you can do about it. And you see, where other people thought that was entertainment, to me, that was an instructional video. I'm the guy in the front seat taking notes. Because I knew I lived in a fallen world, and I didn't get to see a lot of justice. And I saw good guys get kicked around, and I saw the bad guys winning every day. And it's not fair was my battle cry. That was the first words out of my mouth as a kid. It's not fair. Even as a kid, it wasn't good enough. Mom gave my brother and I M&Ms. Now we have to count to see who got more. And because of that, I get to church and they're going submit and stand down and, but there was another thing that Grandma taught me. 2 wrongs don't make a right. And it took a while to get my head around that one too, but I had an epiphany one time. I really, I don't claim a lot of spiritual experiences, but this one undeniably I think was piped in. I had my house burglarized. I come home, the only 2 things they stole was money and booze. Kind of narrows the field of suspects right there. So I was robbed by somebody like me, basically. And it was spooky. The things that were piped into my head on how I was going to get even with these people. I'm thinking things like, and I didn't even drink then, but I had a bottle of champagne in a wine rack just for looks, because wine racks look stupid without bottle of wine in them. So, I had a wine rack and a bottle of cheap champagne, and they took it. Like I was even going to drink it. I always told people I only kept it around. Well, what's the champagne for? I went, well, the day they cure alcoholism, I'm going to pop that. And drink the whole thing, because I'll be healed. But, so they stole this bottle of cheap champagne, so I'm thinking, I'm going to get me another bottle of champagne, and I'm going to put strychnine in it, and the next time they steal champagne from me, boy, that'll learn them. And I'm thinking, I'm going to hunt these people down. I'm going to get my money back and all of theirs too. And I'm going to do this to them. I'm going to do that to them. And maybe I'll even break into the neighbor's house and steal their stuff to make up for losing mine. And I had this moment of clarity where I don't claim to hear voices because they give you blue pills for that, I think. But I had this thought that went, that's the game. That's what he wants you to do. And I got to thinking about this. And it reminded me of a great story, 1964. Jim Marshall, Minnesota Vikings defensive end. Jim Marshall was a great football player, Hall of Fame in the end. But he only got remembered for one thing that made him famous. He scoops up the ball, and he runs it 70 yards for a touchdown. The wrong way. He got turned around on the field, and he ran that ball in for a touchdown, but he ran toward the wrong set of goalposts. And for the rest of his life, guess what his nickname was? Wrong Way Marshall. Wrong way. And you see, picture this poor guy scooping up the ball. I got the ball, and he's running. And here comes his own players running up behind him. He thinks they're defenders. Oh, cool. No, they're trying to tackle him. They're trying to chase him down to keep him from getting in the end zone. He thinks they're on his side. Not anymore. And imagine his horror when he gets into the end zone, throws the ball, looks at the scoreboard, and it goes cha-ching with the score on the wrong side. I just told you the story of my life because that's me. All my life, I've sometimes played offense and sometimes played defense. Sometimes I got the ball. Sometimes they got the ball and they run past my defenses and they score. I can't always prevent that. I'm a huge believer in problem prevention, but sometimes they'll run through you, baby. There's nothing you can do. But then we get the ball and we get to respond. Now, how are we going to play that out? Two wrongs don't make a right. And it dawns on me finally how wrong I'd been my whole life because he got me. The bad guy got me. But now what? I'm suiting up for the wrong team, cha-ching, 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 and putting more points on his scoreboard. You hit me, I hit you. You steal from me, I rip you off back. I get back even. I get even ahead in those deals. I'm going to run you into the ground. Cha-ching, 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 cha-ching. That's the game. That's what he wants you to do. So I have this epiphany. I'm thinking, okay, how do you put points on the other side? And it tells me right here. Book of Romans, 12th chapter. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse. Do not repay anyone evil for evil. Do not take revenge, my dear friends, but leave room for God's wrath. For it is written, it is mine to avenge. I will repay, says the Lord. On the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. In doing this, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. You see, that is, today I understand that as being purely practical. What's the one thing that trumps defeating your enemies? Converting them. Converting them. Because you see, it's one thing to go out and crush my enemies, to disarm them, to defeat them, but imagine if I could convert them. If they turned around where they're still armed, but now they're fighting with me instead of against me. That would be a win-win. And in that way, my side gains strength. I don't just weaken the opposition, I strengthen the right side in a scenario like that. And you see, today, that not only seems very spiritual, but purely practical. That just makes good sense, to put the points for once in my life on the right side of the scoreboard. And this part about heaping burning coals on his head, the first time I read that, I thought, oh, that's a good idea. I remember reading an account one time of a gal who was counseling with her pastor and talking about her abusive husband, and the church leader said to her, "Did you try heaping coals of fire on his head," referring to this 12th chapter of Romans? She said, "No, but I thought about dousing him with a hot skillet of grease." Not exactly the same thing. But the whole thing is about, part of it has to do with how you refine metals to separate the impurities from what is pure. Others think that it has to do with keeping fire from the inside out on people to provide guilt, shame, and conviction. Others, it talks about melting the heart with heat. How many times didn't we say, wow, that just melted me when I saw that? But I think the best way of understanding exactly what they're talking about was, has anybody ever had somebody they really despise do something nice for them? Don't you hate that? I do. God, I wish they could just be consistent. If I'm going to dislike you, at least be dislikable. The last thing I want somebody to do when I'm in the middle of hating them is to do something kind or wonderful, especially kind and wonderful for me. So, with that point of view, this makes a whole lot more sense of how this process works. And that leads us to the final point of this, is why? Why on earth should we submit to one another? And it tells us, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Because what we need to know is that we are following the right leader. Now, this is where this whole thing of submission gets a little bit confusing and a little bit dicey, because usually the people that use the word submission are not referring to how they are living their own lives, but how you ought to be living yours. And what they are demanding from us is submission instead of modeling it in their own life. And I think especially today, we run into a lot of challenges with modern society on what the unrealistic expectations are on Christians and on Christianity in general. I think we hear that voice both from without and from within. If you were really a Christian, you would blank. It really fascinates me today about how many people who don't even claim to believe in Jesus, who don't attend church, and who certainly do not subscribe to what the Bible says, sure know that book pretty good, don't they? When they're using it against us. I don't practice Christianity, but I know enough about it to know what you ought to do. If you were really a Christian, you'd be doing this. You know what that always reminded me of? Do you remember right after Christ's baptism, there was the 40-day temptation of Christ out in the desert where the devil came to him and hammered on him for 40 days. But you know what? The way that the devil tempted Christ was how? With the Bible. with the Old Testament, with the Old Testament scriptures. He was trying to trip him up, but not just trip him up, or tempt him, but using the very words of God to do it. That cracks me up. And then how did Jesus defend himself? By pulling out other verses. It was a battle of verses there. And really, if you back up and take a look at that, that's pretty funny. Here's the devil quoting the Bible to Jesus Christ, and then Jesus quoting the Bible back to the devil. Crazy. But, the devil telling him things like, if you are the Son of God, tell these stones to become bread. Which he obviously could do, because later he made a whole bunch of bread, the loaves and fishes thing. Jesus fires back, man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God. Then the devil hammers him, if you are the Son of God, he said, throw yourself down, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you, and they will lift you up in their hands, so that you will not strike your foot against a stone. Sounds good. Bible says. And then Christ shoots back, do not put the Lord your God to the test. And then again the devil comes at him. All this I will give you, all the kingdoms of the world, if you will bow down and worship me. Which is what Christ's mission was. Come down to the earth and take all the kingdoms. But he was the king, but no. Christ fires back again. Away from me, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only. So you see, that's the kind of debate that we can get into with the world. And who is behind the world? Same guy. But sometimes using our own book and our own words against us. And not only does that play out in the world, it plays out in my head. If you were really a Christian, you would say this. You wouldn't say that. You'd do this. You wouldn't do that. And what's the source of my information? My lying lower nature. Ran into an old drunk one time who said something that kind of amused me. He says, I have false teeth, he says, because I stood up when I should have shut up. There's a lot of times that I made the same mistake. I stood up when I really should have shut up. But there's other times when I shut up, when I look back and wish I would have stood up. The thing about Christ was, he stood up. And the thing that we can learn from his example, I believe, is, in the words of C.S. Lewis, Christianity is a fighting religion. As I've often said from up here, God is not looking for diplomats. He's looking for soldiers. If you read that New Testament, it is chock full of war terms. It talks about fighting the good fight and being a soldier for Christ. It talks about putting on the full armor of God. And it talks about the sword of the Spirit and the breastplate of righteousness and the helmet of salvation and all of the equipment and the armaments of battle. We are not here to negotiate with evil. We are here to defeat it. We're here to eradicate it. So how does that fit exactly with submission? And I think the answer is, when the Bible talks about submitting, it does not say submit to other people or submit to the world. It talks about primarily submitting to God Almighty. And there's three things that give us guidance and direction in that military mission. From God, we get a perfect set of principles, a written word that tells us what to do and not do. But those principles are sometimes a little hard for us with our earthly thinking to understand, aren't they? It's easy to get confused. So he gave us a second, more critical piece, which was not only a book full of principles, but he gave us a living example through Jesus Christ, who didn't just tell us what to do, but showed us what to do. Anybody that's ever been in training for a new job, don't you appreciate it when somebody doesn't just tell you what to do, but they show you? Isn't that a better way of learning? Oh, here's how you do that, but here, now let me show you. And then they let you do it yourself. And I think that's how we learn the best. Don't tell me, show me. And that's where the world lies. We live in this age of political correctness. A world that holds us to an untrue standard of tolerance and of acceptance. Bombarded with books since the 70s like, I'm okay, you're okay. People saying, can't we all just get along? No. Christianity is a fighting religion. We cannot compromise. I've often said Bible Christianity is kind of like Jack Daniel's whiskey. It doesn't mix with anything. Best served straight. And you add things to this or take things away, yeah, you won't hear that anywhere else. But you can't add to this, you can't take away from it. It stands on its own 2 feet. The book says what the book says. Because it is truth. Anything more than the truth is a lie, anything less than the truth is a lie. So the world tries to tell us how we ought to be if we're doing it right, if we were true Christians. And they sell us this stuff where we can't talk about anything. They're forcing us to shut up. How are they doing it? Well, we can't talk, we can't open a dialogue about certain things without coming under attack for being less than loving, can we? God forbid you even mention anything about homosexuality. What are you going to do? You're going to get labeled either homophobic, which says, oh, you're bringing that up out of fear. Or we're going to be charged with a hate crime. You're bringing that up out of hatred. The possibility that doesn't even make the list is we're bringing this up out of love. Can't be love. How could it be love? You're hurting feelings. You're stepping on toes. The same with can't talk about abortion. Well, that'd be judgmental. How dare you bring that up, judging people? God forbid we even talk about anything to do with race. We're going to get labeled being a bigot or being prejudiced. Can't even go there anymore. We can't address false religions. Why? Oh, well, you're intolerant or you're arrogant. Who are you to say you're right and they're wrong? I'm running the risk of making people upset just by even saying some of this stuff out loud. But you see, the problem is how we define the word love. Because if you look at how Dan Alexander wrote the book Bold Love, where he said if Christ had practiced the kind of love that we advocate nowadays, he would have lived to a ripe old age. Amen. We have to look beyond just what the Bible says. It says we have to be loving, we have to be submissive. But how do we define love? How do we define submission? And you see, instead of just asking the question, well, what would Jesus do? Because I hear that a lot. Jesus wouldn't say that. Jesus wouldn't even bring that up. See, instead of asking what would Jesus do, I like a different question. What did Jesus do? What did Jesus do? A little harder to dodge that one. You know what Jesus did? Jesus loved everybody, and he loved them enough to accept everybody just as they were. No expectations, no criticisms, no condemnations. His love demanded that he accept everybody just as they were, but he also loved them enough to not leave them there. He also loved them enough to tell them the truth, and he turned them around as best he could and got them pointed in the right direction, and he always tried to bump them one step closer. Not a quantum leap, not going to take you and expect overnight for this radical conversion, but to take them where they were at and at least get them one notch closer. And he wasn't any more successful than any of you or any of me either. He failed miserably in many cases, but it didn't keep him from trying. So, with that in mind, I think that we are really called to be tolerant. And we'll call the worship team up for a closing song. You know, I'm a firm believer in tolerance. Believe me, I am. But because we are called to be tolerant, I think we need to define that too. We are called to be tolerant of wrong people, not tolerant of wrong beliefs. And I think that we can be so accepting that you leave the barn door open to let the foxes in with the chickens. And I don't think that it's unkind or unloving to address certain things any more than you could say a doctor is unkind or unloving for telling a patient he has cancer. Why is it okay for a doctor to tell you you have cancer, even though it might upset you or hurt your feelings? It's because it's the truth and he has a solution. Hopefully, we sometimes need to adjust not what we say, but how we say it. We can be much more submissive and much more kind and gentle and loving, speaking the truth in love, but we still need to say it. So, with that, thank you. Closing prayer today is very simple. It's, Lord, please help us to be more meek, more gentle, more kind, more loving. But help us, Lord, to do that according to your standards and not just the standards of this world. We ask this in Jesus' name.